focusing on radicalization, security, and regional futures. This will take us into a broader picture of the topic we're discussing. This discussion will explore how rising nationalism and ethno-political radicalization are reshaping security and stability in the Western Balkans, as well as what that means for the region's cooperative future.
So this session will be moderated by Frauke Zibes, visiting fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, and the panelists in the panel will gonna be Bojan Elek, journalist and policy analyst, Agon Malici, non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, and Dr. Bojana Zoric, policy analyst for the Western Balkans and the Eastern neighborhood at the EU Institute for Security Studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeta and Alexander. Good morning also from my side, and also a big thank you from me to KCSS, NSI, and Spunker for organizing this fantastic conference. As was mentioned, our panel will deal with ethno-politics and the risk it poses to regional stability, as well as the role of regional cooperation and creative pathways to reconciliation. Because as you are undoubtedly aware, the lack of meaningful reconciliation after the wars of the 90s has left ethno-nationalist rhetoric and narratives to be a major currency among local political elites to advance their power, to the detriment of inter- and intra-societal cooperation. At the same time, we see that this is not exclusive, of course, to the Western Balkans, but this is, of course, a broader European and also global trend. But I would argue that the region is more affected by it, due to the fact that the Euro-Atlantic integration is as of yet incomplete. And one of the fields where we see this most clearly, I would say, is the enlargement process of the European Union, where ethno-nationalism has led to bilateral vetoes of the enlargement countries, and the rise of ethno-nationalist and anti-EU parties and sentiments in the EU also puts at risk the enlargement process and the joint European future more broadly. Of course, which would come to a huge detriment of regional stability, prosperity, and reconciliation. So we have a lot to talk about, and I'm really happy to have a fantastic panel here, Bojan, Bojana, and Agon. And as all of you are also focusing in your work, especially on EU enlargement, we will put a focus on this dimension and also try to go a little bit beyond the artificial borders that are around the so-called Western Balkans, without, of course, forgetting that these artificial borders have very real consequences for the countries and the populations. So we're going to have two rounds, first focusing a bit on the risks, and then secondly on the creative pathways that were mentioned. And between the two, we'll also already give a chance for short questions and comments before moving to the second round. And I want to start, very long microphone. I want to start with Agon, looking at our host country today, Kosovo. So we see, especially in Brussels, where I'm based, a new hype on enlargement, especially by the Commission. But Kosovo is rarely on the table, and let alone at the table in this. And from your own perspective, but also from your research, what would you say this protracted membership did? What are the consequences on this, including for inter-ethnic reconciliation, and what are the key factors in this?
Thank you, Frauke. I think one of the most visible impacts for everyone in this room is you can feel the energy in the room, which is this. I told Johan earlier that maybe add another D to the event organization, which is depression. I think it has installed a sense of depression that even the people who are working on these topics are running on sort of reserve energy right now. And yes, there is a hype, enlargement hype, but I think we're now paying the cost of 10 years of EU basically having no enlargement, but more treating the Balkans as sort of more containment area rather than one where they're enlarging. So the impact is, I think, they've lost the youth in the sense of being a driver for this narrative. I've heard of research being done here. I think one of the researchers who is over there, I've overheard her once say that she did focus group with youths about the future of Kosovo, in which nobody even mentioned the EU once. So it's not a part of the vision. it's been eliminated as sort of a vision for the future, which I think is worrying because while there is a door being opened by the EU, suddenly there is kind of nobody sort of willing, to drive from this side. I think that's a huge problem. I think another problem is that the accession was supposed to be a peace irrelevant. This idea that we will be joining one day and then border things will not be an issue. Borders became an issue over the last decade. Security became a primary concern because of that, and because we're not feeling the accession hype, as you said, it's still security centered, the discourse. The whole country is now inward-looking and looking at threats and prioritizing threats, amplifying threats. Because of this sense of insecurity that this lack of perspective is offering, and when you have that kind of a climate that is politically induced, politically promoted, basically, for example, in the case of Kosovo, if you look at the TV channels right now, every night, the whole line of argument between the parties is that you're working for Serbia, you're working for Serbia, you're working for Serbia. Everything is now this sort of proving a sense of patriotism and presenting the other side as a sort of existential threat. So this is the level of the debate. Nobody's talking about what we're losing from this focus on just security aspect of it and talking about the opportunities that this enlargement hype is offering. And that is having a detrimental effect on democracy because it's suppressing critical voices. If you say something along the kind of narrative that we're promoting here with KPDS, it's automatically labeled as, again, some sort of Serbian agenda, some sort of attempt to, appease something. So I think, but one thing that provides some glimmer of hope is that what Albania is doing and what Montenegro is doing, it's followed here, especially Albania. And I think it might start to kind of trigger some thinking in people. But wait, maybe we're missing out on something because people see it. People see Albania on a regular basis, and this fear. I think we need to do a little bit of our fear mongering as well. I'm trying to fear monger Kosovars into the idea that in 4 years from now they might have a hard border with Albania, which is almost in existence now. The enlargement hype, we're not feeling it. We're seeing it somewhere else, but we don't have. We've lost the strategic, as a society, the strategic vision about Europe because of political elites that want us to look inward. And I would not say political elites, and I will not refrain from saying that the responsible side is, and at least in my view, the current acting government and the largest party. They have the primary responsibility for this. But then their energy is reflected in wider society in not seeing this bigger strategic picture.
Thank you. I really like the formulation by Barbie before, this kind of constant reinvention of frozen conflicts in the current atmosphere. And I think that, especially what you mentioned, a lot of the people from civil society here are really affected in this by their daily work, and I know this from you. You mentioned already Albania, so I'd have a short follow-up question on this. What would you say are the risks locally but also regionally if Albania is eventually blocked, having done all the homework, let's say, has done all the homework, but then it's blocked by a French or other veto? What would you say is the other implications of the risks?
Well, I guess there are serious implications. We've seen that in the past decade. The moment that enlargement stopped around, let's say, after Croatia went in, everyone started to have a new look at the security architectures. Okay, if we're not going into the EU, which was supposed to resolve this issue of borders, then it opens the way for alternative projects. Hopefully we won't have that veto. I think they're working hard to make sure that there is no veto, by creating this space for this, let's call it second-class membership, which and Albania is almost too willingly now promoting this idea of, we were so happy to join, we're so, We don't even need a veto in the EU. We don't even need a commissioner. Hopefully that does not happen, but if it does, then we will be back to, I'm afraid, discussions we had around 2017, 18, revisiting border issues, security architecture, ethnic-based models, because we've seen it happen once, and I'm pretty sure that these ideas come back. The moment the EU steps away from this commitment of having all the Western Balkans join, we will have the question of borders reopened, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Thank you, and I want to take this question also to Bojan. Now, what, in your view, would be the risk of regional stability, but also for the EU as a whole when it comes to security, if the Council cannot fulfill the enlargement process that has been, the enlargement promise that has been given to Montenegro and Albania?
Thank you, Frauke. So I think it's important to first see what this enlargement promises, because it's a bit more complex than we think, including due to the factors that Agon mentioned. So not only the candidate countries need to fulfill reforms and open and close all negotiation chapters, there's also the Council that needs to approve the accession protocol, meaning 27 EU member states. And we, of course, need to be fair and say that there is a positive momentum, hype, whatever you want to call it, and this is irrespectively of the fact that this round of enlargement is particularly different. The geopolitical and security imperative has now come at the forefront, and this is what we have been hearing from the EU leaders, and Commissioner Kos has really steadfast at this. We need to enlarge now because the window of opportunity is open, and what we see from Brussels and other EU leaders, leaders from the EU member states, is actually that the momentum is quite favorable for the two mentioned candidate countries. So these are maybe two factors that play into the equation, but there is also one element that is out of the EU's control, out of the control of the candidate countries, and this is of course broader geopolitical context. Russian aggression against Ukraine, and this has been something that has pushed the enlargement talks back onto Brussels' agenda, mostly due to Ukraine, but Albania and Montenegro have used this opportunity. And I cannot emphasize enough how important the outcome of the Russians' war of aggression in Ukraine is, because it will in a way influence the EU's posture, the willingness actually to enlarge. And we are now in the midst of peace talks, so we do not know how it will end, but what we know is that even the candidate countries, if they fulfill their criteria, if they do their homework, there are other elements that really are important and that will have a final say whether they finally join the European Union or not. So geopolitical context, and I believe that yesterday it was mentioned during the dinner talks, I think we are all in a way very much busy with our everyday tasks and contexts in our respective countries or in the EU, in Brussels, for those who work in Brussels, but we really fail to see the importance of today's day, including for Albania and Montenegro. And then getting back to the question on regional stability, we have to be also honest and say that the regional stability is not dependent on the enlargement process as such. We do know that it's complementary because the EU enlargement has always, in a way, been other side of the coin. But when it comes to the core and the hardcore power, hard power and stability in the region, it was always NATO at the forefront since the 1990s. It was the United States as the main driver of regional stability and security, and the European Union enlargement and process served only as complementary. And of course, it's an indispensable part because there is no security without democracy, without stable institutions, without a functioning rule of law and good governance. And this is why both NATO and the EU worked hand in hand to actually ensure that we do live in a stable region. And then if you look at the parameters against which one can compare whether there will be any risk of instability or not, again, enlargement is not one of those, but it is a supplementary act. And this brings me to the point that I wanted to make, is that even if Albania and Montenegro do not succeed to join the European Union by 2027 or 2030, it does not mean that the region will, by default, become a stability risk. What I see here is at stake is a reputational risk for the European Union if the Council does not approve or does not go through with their promise, as we say, although everybody is avoiding the word promise because it carries a certain expectations on both sides. So there is the risk of, as I said, reputation, there is a risk of disillusionment, further loss of trust in the EU process, in the enlargement process, in the EU member states. And of course, there is only as much as the European Union or the European Commission can do, because when we talk about the enlargement process, there are so many institutions involved, including the EU 27 member states. But also here, here I need to use the example of North Macedonia, who has been in the process for so long. It signed a stabilization and association agreement together with Croatia, and Croatia has been in the Union for 12 years. What we see is actually that the country is still on the EU path. So it has not lost the trust, or its main strategic objective still remains the European Union, irrespectively of the fact that there have been certain and very serious obstacles and the country has not moved forward. So I believe that even if the Council does not fulfill promise, as you pointed out, I do think that these countries are going to stay on the EU path, and simply because there is not other alternative. What the European Union offers is appealing not only from economic perspective, it's appealing from ideational or norms-based perspective, because when you think where would you like to travel, or where would you like to send your kids to school, or even where would you like to keep your investments, it's always stable democracies. It's always the point of the term of the West, so either the United States or the European Union, but it is never China or Russia or other actors that are present in the Balkans, because they're simply not safe and they're simply not democracies. So my final point is that I think that if the enlargement promise does not go as super speedy as we are now talking about it, I do think that the only future of all of these countries, including the one where we are today, is in the European Union. And what needs to be done in the meantime is not to maybe play around with the promises and with the fixed dates, because they're very dangerous. They really lead to disillusionment, but we really work hard that by the time the EU member states need to approve the accession protocols, the country actually has a fair advantage to convince all the 27 that it deserves to enter the European Union.
Thank you, and also thank you for mentioning North Macedonia. I mean, Maron, you already referred to, for example, to the research that Lura and her team has done, and I think there we can also see a bit of a risk of, especially losing the youth, and then not seeing it as a priority anymore. A quick follow-up question: you mentioned the role of the EU 27 and their influence, of course, on the process, which is, of course, a council-driven process, so driven by the member states. And Croatia, the country where you are coming from, has of course been the most important partner for Montenegro in the accession process, have been helping through twinning and other kinds of bilateral formats. At the same time, they also have some outstanding issues, so the protracted conflicts are of course going beyond, as I said, the Western Balkans. And this is of course also used, including by actors that are part of the Montenegrin government. So I would just briefly ask you, how much of a risk do you see there when it comes to Montenegro's accession process?
Well, unlike not fulfilling the enlargement promise, this is a real risk. And when we talk about bilateral disputes or outstanding disputes or whatever we want to call them, there is always the asymmetry of power there. So meaning one side always has more power than the other. And this is particularly true for countries that have bilateral disputes, or candidate countries with the existing EU member states, because there is one thing that's called veto, and actually this is what counts at the end when approving again these accession protocols. Also, one of the problems is that all these bilateral issues actually touch upon, some of them concern borders, land borders, or sea borders, but others touch upon identity and language and different interpretations of historical events, which makes the entire process more difficult. But it also, in a way, decreases the likelihood of compromises, because those leaders that are involved in certain disputes, they need to come back to their constituencies and then actually explain why they did certain concessions. We have been seeing these kinds of disputes even prior to Montenegro and Croatia. There is also a precedent in the enlargement process, and this happened when Croatia was acceding, and when Slovenia, it was between December 2008 and October 2009. At that point in time, Slovenia blocked 13 negotiation chapters of Croatia. And this is not to point out fingers at any EU member states or candidate countries. This is just to say that actually it happens. It will happen. It will continue to happen because the EU member states have this, have their more powers, and they will try to influence the process. And in the case of Slovenia and Croatia, it was around maritime border dispute. But what we see today is that these bilateral issues are becoming more complex. And what we heard nowadays, what we hear from Brussels, is that this veto cannot be bypassed, so this is what we need to stick with. And then this also increases the likelihood of a veto being used. And if we connect that with the exploitation of these issues domestically, particularly with malign influence that come from externally, from other malign actors, but they also can come internally from different kind of societal actors who actually benefit from infusing societal divisions within a certain country. It's important to also mention that these malign actors, they exploit institutional weaknesses, they exploit very fragile rule of law and good governance. So the lack of institutional credibility is actually what is here at stake. And for countries that are still fulfilling their reforms, including for Montenegro, one of the recipes to actually fight that is to continue doing its reforms. And then with the good incentives from the European Union, who is also, or the European Commission, who is going to work with the EU member states, there is actually a high likelihood that these disputes at the end will resolve themselves, because Croatia, but also other EU member states, they are really supportive of these talks of the enlargement. So this is not something that could discourage Montenegro and other candidate countries, but actually to drive them forward to address their institutional weaknesses that we have to be honest still persist.
Thank you very much. I want to stay with the topic generally of spoilers and of bilateral issues. And I want to ask Bojan about Montenegro as well, and the role of Serbia and the Serbian government proxies. How much of a spoiler potential do you see for them in Montenegro? What are the main actors, the main narratives, the main means that are being used?
Thank you and good morning to everyone. It's really good to be back to Pristina after last year's KPDS. And let me preface this by saying that I'm coming today from a very different Serbia. Last year event took place in October. In the meantime, in Serbia, very radical changes took place. And it's a different Serbia, if I may say so, than it was last October. And within this framework, obviously, I think it's important to discuss to what extent Serbia can now meddle in the internal affairs of the countries in the region. And obviously, Serbia has been, at least from outside, observed as the country that is the key to the Western Balkan puzzle, if for nothing else, that for the potential to make troubles. And Montenegro comes on top of these countries, along with Republika Srpska and North Kosovo as well. So wherever there is significant Serbian majority or non-majority community. And we have knowledge already of how Serbia managed to interfere in the neighborly relations. For example, this took place mostly in very critical moments. For example, in Montenegro on the eve of joining NATO, when Dikic, among others, he was head of gendarmerie, was arrested for alleged terrorist attempts to commit coup d'etat in Montenegro, on the verge of them joining NATO. 2017, not Macedonia, at the time it was still Macedonia. There was, during the crisis, a Serbian intelligence officer was spotted in Sobrania, and there was this operation going on there to meddle in the internal affairs. So looking by the playbook of the Serbian meddling, it looks very much like Russian. So not kind of creating new crisis, but jumping on the existing one and kind of using these windows of opportunity to cause problems and meddle. And if my hypothesis is correct, the more the, let's say, regime foundation at home are being shaken, the less capacities or bandwidth there is to meddle in the regional affairs. And if we have, let's say, perfect storm of international development, which we have seen now with, for example, sanctions against Radicalization, and now he kind of leaving the power, I could speculate perhaps that now Serbian government or Serbian regime is less concerned about the Serbian world abroad, but more concerned about preserving the power base at home. Based on, for example, sources from BIA, which is Serbian intelligence agency, up to two-thirds of capacities are currently being used to keep SNS people towing the line, official party line. So making sure that nobody kind of slips out, leaves the country, or gets in touch with investigative journalists, or not to keep this monolith kind of compact. So this is based on the official sources from the Security Intelligence Agency.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear that the focus is there.
It is
bad for you, but
definitely because I guess everything that we talk about in Serbia now is how the situation is going to evolve. And obviously we are all aware that the Serbian regime is a Malayan regime. It's the primary vessel of Malayan influence in the region, but also primary vessel of Russian influence. And again, Russian influence in Serbia, there are no anti-Russian measures. We have Sputnik in Serbia. We have RT in Serbian, but these news outlets are not as bad as some Serbian outlets like Informer, Pink, or Happy. So even these Russian news outlets, they need to put a little bit of makeup on the peddle Russian propaganda. It looks better than, for example, Informer's front pages. So I think it's very important that what we're seeing now in the country. And then again, with what's going on, the question is what next? I think that the biggest change that has happened is that SNS and the regime are no longer the biggest political force in the country. Now it's the Serbian student movement with the, let's say, this kind of group of actors, which is very difficult to define. And obviously, this comes with a lot of risks for radicalization, ethnic tensions, and whatnot. But what we've seen in Serbia so far, not so much in relation to Kosovo, but specifically with the Bosniak or Muslim majority in Serbia, it has been very transformational. And I can maybe illustrate this by bringing two examples. One was a speech given by a war veteran of the 90s in front of the Serbian public broadcaster during the blockade of the RTS by the Serbian students, who gave this really emotional speech about how they were tricked by the previous regime, the Milosevic regime, and they committed atrocities in Bosnia, and they sent a message of peace, which is never, something like that never happened in the Serbian public. And the second one would be the relation within the student movement with Novi Pazar State University, which is, again, you probably know, it's mostly populated by Muslim majority region in Serbia, where we had this inter-ethnic kind of getting together that we've, again, never seen before. We had a veiled girl standing next to this, this is very iconic photography with Gali Šajkača, and this was spread around as a message of peace and unity. And then to kind of contrast that with how the government treats these developments, the pro-government tabloids tried to paint this as a terrorist extremist group coming from Novi Pazar to destroy Serbia, because it's kind of sowing divisions. It's how the regime manages to stay on top. And then I mentioned not necessarily in relation to Kosovo, because probably you're all aware that there is very strong pro-Kosovo sentiment in this pro-student movement, particularly on the 28th of June, during the St. Peter's Day, Vidar, when there was this huge gathering in Belgrade. And obviously, I mean, these students, they are post-war generation. They lived in Serbia under Vučić. They were exposed to one type of media content that you are aware how it looks like. So this does not come as a surprise that Serbian students and the democratic movement has ideas that are very, maybe not let's say not dialogue friendly, but I guess this is the best chance we have at democratization in Serbia. And I mean, I wouldn't say that even the contribution of this current regime or the government has been very constructive when it comes to resolving the outstanding issues between Serbia and Kosovo. And maybe just to finish this first round of presentation, saying that obviously with all criticism that is due for the new movement for this right-wing, or let's say nationalistic rhetoric, the government of Serbia as well did quite a lot of, and invested quite a lot of resources to paint them as extremists and radicalists in the international arena. There are confirmed sources, credible sources saying that the Serbian embassies were sending out letters to the Western countries claiming that Russians are behind the student protests in Serbia and trying to kind of raise fears in the region and in Europe that this is something that could potentially destabilize the region and Serbia. And obviously, because the main framework for looking at the region was through this stability perspective, quite few heads were turned.
Yeah, thank you. And I think these narratives are also really working sometimes when you talk to EU politicians and they actually act in this narrative that there's Russian disinformation behind the protests. We still hear that nowadays, and it's quite worrying. I wanted to ask you about Kosovo. You already touched upon that, and just maybe a very short follow-up question. You mentioned that the powers are basically concentrated within the country, within Serbia at the moment, but of course we also have actors, proxies outside the country, and how much do you think that's a spot of attention? I know that there's a upcoming study by AMO in Czechia about the role of the Orthodox Church, for example, in Montenegro, but also other actors, including, you mentioned the media already, but yeah.
Yeah, so over the previous years, the Serbian government has invested quite a lot in this meddling infrastructure, let's call it that, particularly in Montenegro. Some saying, the word on the street was that during the political changes in Montenegro, if Serbia had invested that much money, and some estimates go as much as €500 million in buying media, sending money to pro-Serbian political parties and funding Gongos, Montenegro would have never left Serbia and Montenegro back in 2006. If that amount of money was invested. So this still exists there. Telekom, for example, which is the main Serbian telecom company, owns media in Serbia and there, and this is used as a, let's say, political tool to spread propaganda. Serbian Orthodox Church as well. I mean, but it's completely under the regime. I mean, whatever the regime does, the Serbian Orthodox Church does. Maybe one good example would be that the Serbian Patriarch went to Moscow to meet with Russian Patriarch Kirill and also with Vladimir Putin, mentioning the words like Cvetnaya revolucija, there, the color revolution. So he was used by the Serbian government to go abroad and, fearmonger that there is a color revolution taking place in Serbia. But yeah, these are definitely actors that are, as I mentioned, they work in cooperation with the government, they coordinate with the government. And then again, I would say part of their resources are also being used now for domestic purposes in Serbia, and we've seen that with the Orthodox Church as well. There is also, which is quite interesting, division within the Orthodox Church itself. There is now a little bit more I cannot say liberal in this Serbian Orthodox Church, but let's say more progressive fraction within it. That is criticizing the way that the, let's say, top echelons are behaving, the communication that is going from within the church. And this critique of the Serbian church goes so far to say that once this protracted crisis in Serbia is over, and it will be over the latest by 2027 when the regular elections are coming up, that lustration that will take place must also kind of deal with the Serbian Orthodox Church. But that has to be left to the courage. And there are some actors who are working on this.
Thank you very much for all these insights. I would now like to encourage 2 questions from the audience or comments. And I want to mention the youth perspective, and I saw Marigona and some other youth representatives, so I would give them the advantage to speak as well, if you want to, obviously, and of course to, but I also saw one question here. Do we have a microphone? Over there, sorry. Yeah. And please briefly introduce yourself even though, of course.
Thank you, and good day to all. Marko Sakovic from Isaac Fund Belgrade. My question is for Agon and Bojana. How does rearmament, or the whole, it's not only narrative, I mean it's actual rearmament that's happening in the region. How does it fit into this framework that you have described and this whole, well, we say, ethno-politics? I mean, this is very military terminology, reloaded, you know, and how does it fit in all that? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have one more question? I didn't want to put you on the spot, Mariko, by the way, just but if we have anybody else? No, not for now? Okay, we have a second round of Q&A afterwards, so I'll give it back to the panel, and of course feel free to also react to each other's responses. Agon, why don't you start?
It was going to be one of the points that I was going to raise as a follow-up. I actually just wrote something for the Atlantic Council on this new arms race, because there's two competing narratives. One is the enlargement hype, and there's another parallel thing happening, which is this new wave of the arms race as well. I do agree with Bojana when she says that sort of enlargement was a complementary to the NATO security architecture in terms of security. So NATO was primary, enlargement was sort of providing extra sort of instruments for security as well. But I think that in a context where, I mean, NATO for now has deterrence in the region. It's very clear that it has had deterrence since the war in Ukraine started. Whatever attempt that was to destabilize the region failed, and I think that's a sign of deterrence. You know, Dodik at every opportunity of being pressured, had to scale back whatever he was doing. In Kosovo, what happened in the north with Radicalization and the aggression, it ended within a day. I mean, of course, accountability has not been done, but you could see that there are limits to destabilizing actors and what they could do. However, the question is, this is why now I think enlargement takes up more of a primary role in security, is what happens in case of a broader Russian aggression in Europe, if it lasts for longer, if it involves more countries, if it means more NATO resources in other parts of Europe and less ability of NATO to focus here, if it involves what is in NATO terms, if you go to a NATO summit or any other European event, the discussion is about this two-front war of China-Taiwan that draws US attention to Asia and then, depleting NATO's capabilities in Europe. So I think in that type of scenario, which I think, I'm cautiously optimistic about the Balkans, not to be, too gloomy here, but I do think that people are thinking also about that kind of gloomy scenario. And I think in that context, enlargement maybe takes a more extra role as a security sort of buffer for the region, in case where NATO is a bit shaky, or at least in its ability to provide deterrence. Because what we see now is that countries in the region are looking at the scenario and rearming seriously. Now there's a lot of money for weapons. The EU is, the rearm program is 800 billion. So when you put 800 billion fund, that means a lot of businesses will now look into it as just a money-making opportunity. Croatia, Kosovo, and Albania have signed a sort of joint agreement on joint military procurement, probably using Croatia's ability to get a lot of this EU money, and which they cannot really use on their own, but use Albania and Kosovo for the production as well. Albania has done the same now with Italy as well. And then now we've seen Serbia's sort of response to this. So, I think this is under the surface yet, but if this new enlargement hype fails again, that's why I think this will, sort of the prominence of this will increase. And there's a huge risk, risk of miscalculation, misunderstandings. I do worry in Kosovo in particular. People here think that they know Serbia or what Serbia is doing, but I'm afraid that Serbia's role is, while it's obviously, as Bojan mentioned, it's here, it's there, the influence is here. It's been amplified. There's an image of an imminent aggression happening. Vucic is feeling the same in Serbia of Croatians, Albanians, everyone ganging up against Serbia. At some point, this rhetoric of escalation, fuels insecurity and creates dynamics that people cannot longer control. And if you have all these weapons, at some point people might feel the need to start using them. So it's definitely something is happening, and there's a risk of that. That's why enlargement now takes a more important role, because if people feel that it's moving ahead, that we're part of Europe economically, it will be different. I do think, though, there is a risk of coming from a partial enlargement of only Albania and Montenegro, in that the divergence that is created, economic to begin with. I do fear for Kosovo in this context, because we're already seeing a lot of capital flight from here to Albania. Big business here is smelling the fact that Albania might be joining the EU, and maybe opening up, thinking that might be their main market. So citizens might soon follow as well. There is a risk, I would say, parallels are never perfect. There is a risk of a little Moldovization of Kosovo, in the sense of Kosovars going to Albania, getting passports there, that being the EU sort of path. For us here. So yeah, and that brings in another risk, which is not just security, it's also demographic and economic. But when you have a lot of weapons, then it also becomes a security risk.
Thank you also for the literature tips, so check out the new paper by Ivan Malici.
Not out yet, I think this week. Yeah.
Keep us updated. Before giving it to Bojan, I would like to add another question that very much connects to this, namely, we have this new strive for strategic autonomy and defense, green transition, all of these different fields. And what, in your view, can be the contribution also of the region, and how can this also foster regional cooperation vis-a-vis, of the region vis-a-vis the European Union, and integration, also to mitigate some of the risks that I was mentioning?
Yeah, so first maybe to address the question. The rearmament of the region, it's on the radar. I mean, the EU is following what is happening, but the main complexity here is that the entire Europe is rearming. So if you look at in that particular context, then it's actually positive, because the countries are increasing their budget defense expenditures. They're trying to put more, particularly for instance Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, who are known to produce small weapons and ammunition. The problem becomes when and where these either weapons or different kinds of aids are being used. And this is actually what makes the entire difference, whether they're going to be used to strengthen the EU's strategic autonomy, or they're going to be used to conduct further exercises with external actors, or signing agreements, for instance, with China or with other countries, or military exercises, etc. Because the entire, Europe is in the war, and these are extraordinary circumstances. So far, signing these kinds of military cooperation agreements, they have been low on the EU's radar, simply due to the fact that 3 countries out of the 6 that are either candidates or potential candidates are also NATO member states, and Croatia and Albania as well. In terms of Serbia's military rearmament and also selling weapons to different parties, but also including the Ukraine, this was seen in a way in a positive view on behalf of both the EU, but also their NATO partners or European partners. So it's just important to see it in this context, and of course when you put it in the context of the Western Balkans, and I think this is what you have been a bit referring to, where ethno-national politics actually played a role, then yes, this is the risk, but so far this it has not been assessed as a really high security risk. And I think now, particularly in Brussels, there is the entire discussion on how could the enlargement partners, so not only in the Western Balkans, but also to the east actually help the EU, but also European partners rearm, and how could they more actively be engaged in this industrial complex, that European industrial complex that the EU is now trying to push forward. So discussions are now ongoing, but I think it's also in a way time to stop talking about the countries in the region as solely security consumers. This has been the narrative that's been present here for a while, and mostly because of the role of international community, particularly in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also in Kosovo because of the KFOR. But if you really analyze contributions of the countries of the region, but also individual countries, then you actually see that the countries are participating in different peacekeeping operations. They're contributing with their civilian troops, with their military troops around the world, not only in the region. But I think now, due to Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, this narrative is shifting safely but slowly, and also due to the emergence of different EU tools such as the SAFE instrument, but also European Peace Facility, where money has been released for financing different collaborations between the EU member states and the partners. I think this will just pick up, but definitely the partners here have a say. But again, the contexts are a bit different because Europe is in war, as we hear. On maybe the strategic autonomy, just to complement this, I think a wonderful example, although I also understand that enlargement partners and candidates or potential candidates do not want to hear about it, but it's this gradual integration. And no, it's not a substitute for the EU membership. It has been reiterated many times, including in Brussels. This is just one step, intermediary step, before the countries assume their EU candidacy. If you look at this, the gradual integration has really advanced in the past few years. If you look at the countries who have negotiated the accession 15 years ago, this did not exist. And here, when we talk about security, I can name an example of, for instance, Frontex, that deals with threats on the EU's external borders. And Frontex has, through this gradual integration scheme, it has working agreements with all of the 6 partners in the region. And just a few weeks ago, it deployed its first full mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where additional 100 Frontex officers across Europe were deployed in order to work hand in hand and side by side with the border police in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so far, particularly after the war, Frontex has also increased its presence across the region. At this moment, there are 600 police officers patrolling and working together with the border police of all of the 6 partners. So this is not only, being present on the ground, it is actually bringing European expertise, knowledge, but also technologies. It also helps candidate countries to align their standards, rules, and procedures with the EU's one. So I think this is a really good example of how this gradual integration is ongoing. And there is also, when we talk about the strategic autonomy, the question of European defense agencies and other agencies, such as, for instance, ENISA, Agency for Cybersecurity, because apart from the war in Ukraine, we also have a hybrid war that is ongoing for years now, but the technologies are becoming more and more sophisticated. And this is also one of the shortfalls of the very weak infrastructure in the region. So in my view, it's only the matter of time when the access to a more sophisticated, more deeper access to these agencies will be actually granted to the enlargement partners. It's not as easy, but still the EU is working on it. I think this is a really good example of how the partners can actually contribute to the EU being a more safer place.
Thank you very much. And talking about literature reviews, Just 1 second, please. Just because I just want to get in a short literature recommendation, because when it comes to ENISA, KCSS has prepared a brilliant report with suggestion of how to bring the Western Balkans closer to the joint cyber defense and generally cyber framework. And then when it comes to the contribution of the Western Balkans to the defense capabilities, there is reports by IAMF, also by Carnegie Europe. So definitely a recommendation. Barriers, comments, mindful of time, 2 sentences.
I really, don't want to hijack the discussion in any way. Just briefly some comments. I mean, when you look at some of the systems that are being procured, it's clear that they are not procured because of Russia. I mean, just when you look at drone systems, anti-drone systems, my concern is we are procuring these systems because we don't want to be behind, and the question is behind whom? And I don't think it's Russia. So that's my concern, and I think we should really pay more notice at what is being procured at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very valuable comment. Mindful of time, I want to move to another topic, namely regional cooperation. And both Bojan and Sargon, you are part of check the name, the Western Balkan 6 Strategy Group, which is powered by the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And my question would be, what is the role of this and other formats? I know you've been part of different formats, including where we first met, the training program at the German Council on Foreign Relations. So what do you see is the role of this in advancing regional cooperation and advocacy, regionally but also beyond?
Well, yes, I mean, Western Balkan as such, I mean, we were put into this designation of Western Balkan, although there is some strong, let's say, disagreement even within the Western Balkans about what this means. I know for sure in Albania, you guys are trying to rebrand yourself as a Mediterranean country, like we don't have anything to deal with these guys. We have different issues we are looking at.
Albania is pulling in Croatia,
yeah. Although everybody was kind of contained in this Western Balkan Summit declaration in Thessaloniki. But yeah, I guess we kind of being put into this straitjacket of the Western Balkans, the only way that you can meaningfully engage in advocacy or any kind of work that involves European actors or international actors would be through a regional approach, because we are too small and, let's say, maybe perhaps even insignificant to have others dealing with us on a country basis. So yeah, definitely, I guess maybe to mention the network that you mentioned, this is a group of experts from all the Western Balkan 6 countries, trying to, like many other initiatives, I guess, to kind of help us move along the European integration path, but also insisting highly on the reconciliation and better neighborly relations in the region. How we try to do that? Well, we do travel extensively. This group is particularly, let's say, engaged with the European fora. And maybe I can tie it up with the question about the armament. We went recently to the Riga conference, all of us, to see what were the European discussions that are taking place now. And it is literally dismantling the welfare state in order to build the warfare state. It looked like an armament fair. And everybody was pushing, the best equipment they have, the drones, the anti-drone systems, the boats, the guns. And everybody is up to spending now, what, 5%, 3.5 on arms, 1.5 on civilians. And with the world changed so much, I think it's going to be very difficult to do what Mr. Masakwi suggested, let's pay attention to what's being procured in the region. And for sure, Serbia, it depends on how the Serbian president feels and the shopping spree he might take, because we're buying Rafales from the French. Bayraktar drones ordered from Turkey, but then the procurement cancelled because Kosovo security forces didn't even get a shipment of it. Some weapon systems from China, but why do you need Rafales if, for example, Serbia might end without fuel this winter, because the US sanctions against our national oil company will enter into force soon. We might, be freezing over this winter. And this was my shock today when I came in this morning to Christian and saw diesel prices 1.3 euro. In Serbia, they're already close to 2. We're heading towards, energy crisis. So I guess it's it's a bit tricky situation that is coming up.
Just on.
Yeah, no, I wanted to give you the floor as well, just very briefly, maybe the whole way warfare state. I think it's a really important topic. I mean, I was also really shocked when seeing the speech by Marko Vučić saying, our states are spending so much on welfare, this is where we need to make cuts for armament. And then again, when we're talking about the role of youth and their support for these kind of things, I think this is going to be a huge burden on them. But yes, please if you add, and also if you have any best practices from regional cooperation.
No, it's just, you can notice the shift in the paradigm. It used to be democracy, human rights. Now we go, it's defense primarily is the concern. Even now, because the NATO 5% includes the one, out of it 1.5% is investment in civilian sort of infrastructure for defense. And even in Germany, we kept being asked, oh, in former Yugoslavia, you used to have defense as a subject in schools. Like, how did that work? So, this is the questions kind of suddenly being asked of us, as like the sort of the Western interest. But I think just to mention the importance of our group, I think what we try to do is, and this is somewhat refreshing when we meet European audiences, that I think there's huge fatigue in the West with the Western Balkans because it's 6 countries, each one with so many problems with one another and domestic, and so we've become like this, like this guy at the park you don't want to talk to because he comes to you always with problems, so we've become annoying. And what we try to do at least is to develop consensus within our region, talk with the same voice because we come from a value-based sort of standpoint on democracy, and come with a regional perspective and, surprise people saying, listen, we are here together as 6 countries and we want to do this. And I think the leaders should, if they do less, for example, if the leader of Kosovo and Serbia at this moment just go to Brussels and say, we want to actually move forward, it's amazing how many doors they would open, because, how many doors we've shut down because of this sort of fight. So as a group, we try to do that at civil society level and engage a lot of interlocutors, including the German parliament, where this 2 or 3 weeks ago had interesting exchanges, even with the far right there, just to see where they stand on these issues. But I think another thing we're trying to do is expand coalitions, not with typical addresses like Berlin and Paris, but with the Eastern countries as well. Like we went to the Baltics. I think there's a really big importance to expand cooperation with Ukraine, the South Caucasus. We're all in the same boat, in a way. Especially for Kosovo, a lot of the regional countries have bilateral ties at state levels, or some are NATO members, they cooperate at NATO, but at civil society level, at the level of activists, there is very little infrastructure for cooperation. I think we need to build that, not just within the Western Balkans, but as a region with these other sort of regions in Eastern Europe, especially in a context where we have, I would say, less support coming, value-based support coming from the US. We need to expand the pool of allies we have in Eastern Europe, because these are countries with leverage, with interest. The Baltics, they have veto powers in the EU, they're NATO members. So this is, as a group, what we're trying to do, and what I think is important for civil society here, to have a bit more of a broader perspective of things, and not just zoom into these small, petty regional beefs we have.
Thank you. Since we started late, we were given a little bit more time. We have 7 more minutes, and I want to bring in the audience again if there are any questions or comments in the meantime. Don't be shy. If not, I have a lot more questions. Yes, please, gentleman over there. And please introduce yourself also.
Hello. I'm Ronald Goldberg from the Dutch Embassy here in Kosovo, and I have a comment, that is that the Netherlands has always been very critical of enlargement, and we want the countries to be ready for EU membership with high standards, not because we don't like the country, but we want to lift them up to a higher level. And the population was very much against enlargement. But recently we had a Euro barometer, a poll in the Dutch population, and now 68% is in favor of enlargement. And in the Netherlands it works like this: if the population wants something, politicians listen to the population. They're now trying to form a cabinet. That takes time, and they discuss with one another. At least that's something. But I'm a bit optimistic that the toughest one in the EU on enlargement may change its position towards a more positive attitude. So maybe that's something nice to conclude with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see there's a reaction. Just also maybe to add, in the same for your barometer, we also saw that 2/3 don't feel informed enough. So I think this is also going to be a big big question to all of us how we get like EU citizens more engaged in this. But thank you very much for this very positive note. Do we have any more questions, comments? Last chance. Okay, everybody wants coffee. So yes, I want to give respect to the panel, also react to each other, and I want to add one more question to all of you. And let's start with Bojan. Bojan, you mentioned the Riga summit, and I've heard of this idea, which I really like. We have the Baltics Defense College already, and there's this idea of having a Balkans Defense College, a regional one, potentially in Croatia or in Albania, one of the NATO member states, powered by NATO or working closely with NATO. What do you think of this? Is this some kind of creative approach that could help regional cooperation? Yes.
Well, can I maybe first refer the yeah? So about the support, obviously, I also saw the Eurobarometer results on what is the support for margins within the EU, and in all of the countries, I think it's higher than it is within Serbia for joining the EU. It's below 40%. Even Germany, although it sits at the bottom, I think third from below, yeah, it's higher than the support for Serbia joining the EU within Serbia itself. So if you look, for example, Serbia 38.76% for joining the EU. The government is the only kind of running towards the EU, trying to get us there. It looks a bit weird from the outside, but the government has zero intent, or has contributed or done zero to get us there, whereas Serbs or the citizens of Serbia have become disillusioned with this 12 years of negotiations, starting negotiations in January 2014. We used to be frontrunner, now there's Montenegro in Albania. So yeah, but then this, go back to your question about the college, I guess having one regional kind of European college in Tirana is good enough. And I guess if that the regional defense college would include, I mean, the security architecture in the region is a bit tricky, particularly again coming from Serbia. Serbia is an outlier that has declared neutrality with the parliamentary resolution 15 years ago and then put it in our national security strategy in 2019. So I don't see Serbian cadets training at this university, but I guess it's always a good thing to have more regional venues for cooperation, if for nobody else than for NATO countries.
And I think even though of course there is some kind of cooperation between NATO and Serbia, right? Which of course is not mentioned so much by the governing party, but still.
Yes, Serbian government has the best cooperation that you can have. I mean, there were even joint military exercises. Unfortunately, this comes with counterweight, which is having joint military exercises with China this year, or having joint police exercises with Russia before on crowd management and control, and creating these joint working groups that come to call revolution. So it's yeah, we have both, a little bit of both worlds.
Bojan, please also the question on the Balkan Defense College, and of course feel free to react to the comment and also to the other speakers' comments.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a point also on regional cooperation in the Western Balkans. It's not optional. I do understand that at times candidate or potential candidate countries would rather cooperate directly with the EU member states and not with each other because, again, Alan already explained us what are the caveats. But it is actually inscribed in the growth plan for the Western Balkans. It's also part of the SEAs that the countries signed. And if you compare it with the DCFTAs, the Comprehensive Free Trade Agreements that were signed with the Eastern trio, so Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia, you'll see that in their case, regional cooperation is not obligatory. It's mentioned, but only scarcely as something that the EU is supporting. But in the case of the Western Balkans, and of course due to the history and due to the bilateral outstanding issues, it is something that needs to be actually tackled with before joining, and this is also how the EU sees it. What is the positive development here is that 82% of citizens in the region actually support regional cooperation according to the Balkan Barometer survey, if I'm not mistaken, which is an alternative to the Eurobarometer that is within the European Union. And I think this is the highest that it has been in years, because previously it was around 60% and 70%, but today it's 82%. And I think it just reinforces the fact that what has been also discussed yesterday, that there is a strong sense of other societal actors to really dig into the not only political things and actually to try to change things on the ground. So I'm afraid, but luckily I think we're stuck with regional cooperation.
On the Balkans Defense College, I mean, it's not something official. It's hard to, of course, comment on that. What I know is that the Baltic Defense College is actually a NATO-accredited institution, and it conducts different kinds of trainings for the member states. So I think this would only reinforce this notion of regional cooperation, but it would also put an emphasis on the security and defense dimension, which is still in a way in peril because of unresolved and very problematic relations between the neighbors in the region.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the ideas is also that as a Balkans, so like also Bulgaria, Romania, maybe not Greece, but Croatia for sure, maybe Slovenia. So, but again, as you said, it's just an idea at this point.
But I think it would be welcomed, absolutely.
And then you have the last word before we're closing.
Huge responsibility to end on a happy note. No, I just think that to re-emphasize this idea again that the countries in the region are working on their defense capabilities, or but I think there's a real risk of and there's a huge perception of aggressive intent in each country. And as we know from history, a lot of conflict starts because of misunderstanding the intentions or misperceiving threats. That leads to escalation spirals. That's why I think it's very important to, as part of regional cooperation, develop infrastructure for exchange to reduce the risks of this misunderstanding. I know in the past, the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue had some affiliated sort of side initiatives. For example, intelligence chiefs would meet, they don't need to cooperate with one another, but at least if they meet, you can read what the other side thinks better. I think there needs to sort of they need to go back to, I don't know if it's happening now, I really doubt that it's happening now, but there needs to be embedded sort of this defense colleges and any kind of infrastructure that reduces the risk of misperceiving aggressive intent is very welcome, considering this sort of dangerous security environment. So, yeah.
Thank you. We landed almost on time. I hope you're proud of us. So please join me in giving a hand to our amazing speakers. And thank you also very much for staying with us, for your comments and contributions. We are now moving into the coffee break, and afterwards we will return for a panel on malign influences in the Western Balkans.